The Mighty Micro by Christopher Evans was written in 1979, or at least it was first published in 1979. The version that I have was published in 1980. I don't know what the difference between the two is, aside from the one I have being an international release. In his earnest attempt, Evans was trying to explain what microcomputers could do to the average person in 1979. Reading this 44 years later, it's evident that many of the anticipated advancements didn't actually happen or didn't unfold the way that he thought they would. While it might be tempting to chuckle at some of these predictions, I'm going to choose not to because I don't really think that would be appropriate. The first 4 chapters cover a lot of history about computers, and that's what I'm going to focus on. And then I would say most of the book deals with predictions that I'm just going to ignore. So the first, second, and third chapters of this book deal with a lot of history. The first 2 deal with some of the earlier attempts with computers or things that may have been considered to be computers by certain historians. He explains that a lot of these have to do with people's ability to do math and how to calculate things on a larger scale. And yeah, that's technically true. I mean, it is. I really shouldn't say technically. It's true that these were just machines to help people process information and help them do things better. The reader's given several 10,000-foot views and definitions of what computers do. This is supposed to be geared towards people who are unfamiliar with computers. And I think Evans warns the computer experts who may have picked up this book that this really isn't intended for them, so they might not get as much out of it as, someone like me who wasn't a computer expert. This book doesn't really get into how computers work, which is kind of refreshing to me. Every once in a while I read a book about computers and they get really into the weeds about just how things were put together, what different parts are supposed to do, and that kind of goes over my head because 1, it's not right in front of me, I can't really see it, and 2, I have no frame of reference for it, so that doesn't really help too much. The second chapter really covers a lot of ground, though. It covers some of the machines that I would recognize as computers, or things that would be closer to what we would think of as a computer today. It picks up in roughly the 1880s, and it ends shortly after World War II. The most interesting part is probably the code-breaking efforts by the UK, so that's kind of fun, and I do want to say that this was written from a UK perspective, and it doesn't really cover everything that the Polish government had done prior to them going into exile. Chapters 3 and 4 bring us up to 1979. Evans calls this the present because it was the present at the time of him writing. I'm just going to lump it all together to make things easier on myself. This is when a lot of money started getting dumped into computers and technological research. There were considerable advancements in computers, and their uses expanded quite a bit. Microprocessors are brought up, and how they really help things, and how they replaced valves, which confused the shit out of me when he started talking about valves. I had never heard that before. I immediately assumed he was talking about vacuum tubes, which was exactly what he was talking about. And it's just one of those cases where different countries or different parts of the world, different regions, that sort of thing, have multiple names for the same piece of equipment or just the same activity. So if you do read this and you are wondering what a valve is, he's talking about a vacuum tube. Evans lays out how the Cold War changed a lot of things for the consumer market for electronics. Governments would invest money for their own needs, then the business would take whatever they invented for the government and turn it to something that would suit what they needed it to do, and then they would turn around once it got cheaper and sell it to the public. That's pretty much how you get a lot of these things, and computers pretty much followed that as well. Some numbers about computer speeds, which are pretty outdated at this point, get thrown around. This really isn't that big of a deal given the age of the book. The idea that he's getting at, I think, is pretty timeless, though. Computers are going to get faster and smaller, and they will continue to do so. That's essentially what he's trying to say. And as I look at the little computer that is my phone that usually fits in my pocket, yeah, I think he was pretty spot on with that one. It is funny reading this now since, people have cell phones that can do pretty much everything. The fourth chapter, I think, is really interesting because Evans used something that I would know as a structured analytic technique. I doubt that he would call it this, and I'm not sure that the phrase really existed back then. But for my purposes, it was a structured analytic technique, and he used this to draw his conclusions. The one that he seems to have used, or at least the one that I'm associating with it, would either be called a future scenarios projection or possible futures projection. Then this model, you kind of draw a conclusion based off some of the known events that are taking place. And then you say, okay, if these two things are true, then let's project forward into a possible future where this happens, or this other one happens. What he did was kind of look at sort of the rose-tinted glasses version of that, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. So the rest of the book is really where I have a difficult time talking about this and really wondering if I should go into any detail, which I'm just not going to. It's nice to read something like this, but about 4/5 of the book is just him speculating on a possible future that was only really going to take place 40 to 50 years ago and now exists in some alternate timeline that will never happen. It's really just an exercise in creative writing at this point, because he covers roughly 20 years, 1981 to 2000. And a lot of the stuff he brings up is just never going to happen, or may have happened in some parts of the world, but won't happen in others. And he's trying to really project this onto a global scale, and it's just never going to work out, and it couldn't. And yes, this is me talking about something that he wrote about 45 years ago, but yeah, looking at it today, it's really just an exercise in creative writing. Some of them had some merits to it, but no, as the 1980s went on, just more and more things were like, yeah, that's never going to happen. Or at least it's not going to happen the way that he says. So, yeah, I can't really fault him here, but this is where the book sort of falls apart for me. So I really liked the first part of the book. Like, the first 4 chapters in it were pretty fun. After that, I don't think the book really has much value anymore unless you want to use it as a springboard for some creative writing project. Some of the things that he thought would happen partially came true, or would come true 20 to 30 years after when he predicted it would happen. But yeah, it's really just a nice exercise in creative writing at this point. Evans was using very rose-tinted glasses when he wrote about the possible futures of the 1980s and 90s. Almost none of what he wrote about took place in those periods, and really none of it happened on a global scale. Especially the 28-hour work week, that definitely never frickin' happened, especially for a full-time employee. In the 2020s, there were some things that he said would happen. They did take place just 30 years after when he said it would take place, like remote work. The book is interesting for a few reasons, and it is a lovely time capsule from when PCs weren't widespread. The first 4 chapters are great for a little history, but After that, no, there's really no reason to keep reading after that. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.